like to welcome all of you to the Boston College Citizens Seminar as we celebrate 50 years of this event. It is a pleasure being here. My name is Frances Rivera. I'm an anchor reporter for Channel 7 WHGH. And when it's not out from a fire or covered in a storm, it is an absolute pleasure to be here today with this view and to see all of you here for this event. So I thank you for being here too. You know, it's a great turnout. It's great seeing all of you here and seeing so many people with their eager faces here. And the gentleman next to me at my table said, "What do you think what do you think the reason is? Is it because of the content of the glory wedding?" We're like, you know what? It's just both. You get this topic, you get a view like this, and fabulous weather. No doubt all of you will come out. It's great to see all of you here with the smiles and your eager faces to talk about where a wonderful city, like I said, I love so much, and to talk about where this city has been and where it can go. And we all know, it reminds me of that Dr. Seuss children's book, Oh, the Places You Will Go. And you go back and you read about it. I remember that was given to me as a graduation gift, and you think about it, and even though it's for children, in its simplicity, it so applies to everything that we're talking about now. So I'm sure it is exciting for all of us here to see, to talk about again, look back where we've been, where the paths that we have paved, and where we can go as a city. As we get started, I'd like to hear from the president of Boston College as he welcomes you again to Boston College Citizens Seminar, celebrating again 50 years. Please help me welcome Father William Lane.
Thank you, Frances. And I'd like to add to her welcome and thank you all for being with us this afternoon. And also, if I could recognize Mayor Menino, one of the great advocates and tireless leaders of our city, and also Pat Purcell, head of Herald Media and the chairman of the Boston College Citizens Seminar. So thank you too, especially for being with us today. As you know, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Boston College Citizens Seminar, started by Father W.C.B. Joyce, then Dean of the Business School at Boston College. When the seminar began, Boston was a city in crisis. In the prior 20 years, now this is before the mid-1950s, in the prior 20 years, only one major building had been constructed. The value of real estate in Boston had eroded by 25% between the 1930s and the mid-1950s. And 100,000 residents had moved out of Boston in the previous decade. The seminars were such a creative, effective response in two ways. First, the meetings brought together old Boston and new Boston, higher education and business, banking and government. When gathered at the table, these parties discovered that they were a community with an overarching interest, the revitalization of a proud city that had fallen on hard times. Second, those involved in the seminars realized that they simply couldn't allow Boston to be isolated from the surrounding area. The early achievements of the seminar included the establishment of the Massachusetts League of Cities and Towns, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and an institute for the education of professional government workers. We gathered this afternoon in a city much engaged in biotechnology, in a city that has reclaimed its harbor and waterfront, as we can tell so well, in a city known for its hospitals and medical care, and world famous for its institutions of higher education. And while we gather today in strength, we know too that our city, our area, faces major challenges. First, our world is much different than that of 50 years ago. We are more global and diverse, and much more concerned about security since September 11th. We clearly remain a world-class city, but we must deal with increased competition from not only metropolitan areas in the United States, but also places like Beijing, London, Moscow, and Hong Kong. Another challenge that's before us is adapting to changing economic and social realities in Boston. Long-established corporations are no longer headquartered here, and we have to identify and empower a new generation of community leaders who come from different backgrounds and occupations. And so Boston, in spite of all of its progress and resilience, it again needs to gather itself as it did 50 years ago and engage in a dialogue aimed at developing new partnerships and a compelling agenda, much as Mayor Collins, Father Joyce, and Richard Hill, who is with us here today, and all those other Boston citizens did in the mid-1950s, and to whom we will always owe a tremendous debt of gratitude. I am pleased that I can be here today and join in welcoming you and affirm that Boston College remains committed to Boston. St. Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit order, frequently advised his members to build their institutions not far removed from the conversation of the city. He wanted Jesuits in their schools to be engaged with cities, the business community, the issues and opportunities around them. We Jesuits have been doing that for more than 450 years, and we're not going to stop now. All of us at Boston College intend to continue being a resource for this great city, just as this great city and its institutions and people have long been such wonderful resources for us. So I thank you for being here and joining in this wonderful celebration.
Thank you. You know, you ask any of your friends or family who live outside of Boston, and you ask them, you know, rattle off the things that Boston means to you, the things that are synonymous. They'll say the good. Hopefully they'll say that first. They may mention the not so good. But if we focus on the positive, on the great things that have put us on a national limelight in this past year, we've got some great things to be proud of. You know, we had the DNC over the summer, and then we had a parade in the past couple of years. We had another parade. We had another parade, thanks to our Pats. And then we had the parade, thanks to our Red Sox. All of these great parades and great events going on in our city under the helm of a mayor who is currently serving his third term. Please help me welcome Mayor Tomanino for our opening remarks.
Thank you, Francis, for that introduction. It's really great to be with you this afternoon. And as Father Leahy was talking about the great things that started through the 50 years of the Boston College seminars, I remember I was first elected as city councilor. One of my presentations was about Main Streets and how we redevelop small business districts in the city of Boston, and how that's evolved also to be a citywide effort. And I want to thank the Boston College Seminar for giving us that opportunity several years ago. And today we have the opportunity to listen to Tom O'Connor about the history of our city. That's so important because I don't think we really understand where we've been and where we're going and who made the city what it is today and the historical background, institutional knowledge that Tom O'Connor gives. And Richard Hill, thank you for being honored this afternoon. And you know, you're one of the guys who made the city what it is today. Bank Boston, Sherman was at First National Bank, and so many names. Richard, but it's still Richard Hill. It's not the names changed. It's really great to be here this afternoon to talk about some of the issues that affect our city, but also to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Boston City Citizens Seminar. Father Leahy and Peter Rollins have done a fabulous job keeping the seminars alive, providing us with a forum to discuss the issues impacting our city and our region. I want to thank the Boston Redevelopment Authority and the Boston Foundation, Paul Grogan, for collaborating on this report. The indicators report helps us to take stock of where we are, where we've been, and where the city needs to go. My experience as your mayor provides me with my own important set of indicators as how Boston is doing. From the boardrooms to the classrooms, I'm out there every day, meeting with community and business leaders, teachers and parents, workers and residents. Now I'm proud to tell you that Boston is strong and growing stronger every day. A report released by the Boston Redevelopment Authority last month showed that Boston continues to be a magnet for our young people. 1 in every 3 Bostonians residents is between the ages of 20 and 34. Young adults are critical to Boston's economy as employees, as entrepreneurs, and as consumers. They spend more than $3 billion a year. This population is so important to Boston's economy, I have established a 1 in 3 Boston initiative. This program helps connect young adults with resources related to home buying, business development, professional networking, and civic engagement. I have convened an advisory board made of 16 high-energy young adults to help us enhance Boston's attractiveness to this age group. Many of these young people are helping us to shape the industries of Boston's future. Our city is strengthened by its diverse economic base. While other cities' economies are driven by a single industry, Boston has great strength in a number of sectors. That will allow us to remain strong and vibrant, even as mergers are changing the city's corporate landscape. The recent merger between Gillette and Procter & Gamble prompted both companies to reaffirm their commitment to our city. Gillette and Procter & Gamble will continue to invest capital in the South Boston headquarters and provide much-needed funding to several non-profit organizations throughout our city. Boston's economic base is always evolving. The future of Boston's economy is strengthened by our position as a leader in life sciences. We receive the largest share of NIH dollars of any American city, over $1 billion a year. Our companies and institutions attract world-class scientists and researchers. Our venture capital community is among the most active in the country. I created the LifeTech Boston Initiative last year to aggressively and proactively grow and strengthen the life science community in our city. Our goal is to realize 10,000 biotech or biotech-related jobs by the year 2010. We are dedicated to ensuring that Boston residents have the training necessary for these jobs, which are at all skill levels, pay well, and have benefits and provide opportunities for advancement. In June, I'm going to Philadelphia to represent the city of Boston at the 2005 Bio Convention. There, I'll meet with biotech leaders around the world and offer my personal commitment to executives who want to gain access to Boston's competitive advantage. Boston's greatest competitive advantage is our people. The educated workforce is key to Boston's success moving forward. That's why we are investing in early childhood education. Within 5 years, Boston will become the first city in the nation to provide all 4-year-olds with full-day school. The city's early literacy program, Read Boston, continues its mission of having all of the city's children read at grade level by the 3rd grade. At the high school level, we are making reforms by restructuring traditional high schools into smaller learning communities with personalized attention to a range of options. The educated workforce also includes immigrants and people who work hard to improve the economic outcome. My Office of Jobs and Community Services provides hundreds of nonprofit groups with funding to expand opportunities for disadvantaged people. ESOL classes to culinary and hospitality training. These programs give people the tools they need to obtain good jobs. As our workforce grows, it's vital that we continue to build housing that working people can afford. All across Boston, they are aggressively creating new housing units to increase supply and stabilize costs. The first phase of my housing strategy, we approved more than 7,900 new units in 3 years. 2,000 of those were affordable. Now, for the second phase, we have increased our goals. By the end of 2007, we will commit another 10,000 new units, with more than 20% of those affordable. I'm proud to report that in 2004 alone, we approved 3,600 new units of housing, our best year ever. I'm committed to easing housing costs for working families. My middle-income housing funds and middle-income tax relief program are helping to stabilize rents of Boston's middle class. We're doing our part. Like the report says, we can't do it alone. I said it before, I don't mind being the leader on housing. I just can't be the loner. Housing is a challenge throughout this region, and everyone has to do its part. Even as we create new housing opportunities and work to grow the city's job base, Beacon Hill is still holding us back. Boston is overly dependent on property taxes. Our restricted revenue structure creates challenges for our city as we work to manage well and lead our city into the future. It creates challenges for businesses and homeowners as unfair loopholes in the state tax laws enlarge their property tax burden. This time to modernize and diversify Boston's revenue is long overdue. Looking ahead, Boston's future is bright. All the work we are doing to strengthen Boston's economy and its workforce is bringing us closer to our vision of a city that works for everyone. In my travels across this great city, I see engaged citizens working to revitalize our neighborhoods. Businesses choosing to locate and stay in Boston. A public-private sector working in partnership to build a stronger city. I see a Boston as a leader in the 21st century. The Boston Indicators Report is a valuable resource, and forums like this play a key role and generate new ideas and new solutions to the challenges we face. So today, let's be positive about what we've already accomplished. Let's be determined to seize the opportunities that lie ahead for all of us. And let me just say, the Indicator Report gives us a good benchmark. Boston's a great city, we have some great leaders. The question I always see out there is, what are you going to do with a vacuum of leadership? I'll tell you, there's no vacuum of leadership in the city. Maybe the Bank of America isn't there anymore. Maybe John Hancock. There's a whole new group out there, younger group, who has taken over. It's a much more diverse group. It's male and female, black and Latino, and a different Boston than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. This is a new city with new leadership. Let's understand that. It's not the same folks who led Boston for the last 25 years. That's the city that I'm the mayor of. That's the city we have to be involved in. Thank you very much.
Mayor Menino, thank you. And now I am thrilled to hear the words of our keynote speaker. He knows his stuff. He is a university historian, and when I mean he knows his stuff, we're talking about a guy who is what I call 100% Bostonian here. His background being a South Boston native, to his being educated by Boston Latin, also getting his AB and MA from Boston College, and his PhD from Boston University. So he's throwing that city name in there for every single title. Here he is. Help me please welcome Thomas Hancock.
Lee, Menino, friends of Boston. Every now and then we observe a certain event that calls upon a historian to reflect upon the years that have come come between then and now. In today's instance, the Boston College Citizen Seminars, whose 50th anniversary we observe. There are some of us here, as I look around, perhaps more than a few, who can recall what Boston was like 50 years ago. But I venture to say that most of the young students who come into this bright and beautiful city that's all around us these days to either attend college or to take up new positions in our companies, they probably have no idea what things were like half a century ago. In those days, Boston was a badly divided city. Its financial condition was stagnant. Its infrastructure was decrepit. Its citizens were divided by generations of fear and suspicion. The Yankees and Irish, Republicans and Democrats, politicians and bankers, Protestants and Catholics. There was very, very little to draw them together as a community in those days, with mutual interests and shared values. I think the election of 1949 featured an unlikely candidate for mayor. You may recall, in the person of John B. Hines, a professional administrator who nevertheless defeated the legendary James Michael Curley. And in 1950, ushered in a really new era in Boston politics. Setting out on a policy of inclusion, Hines reached out to members of the city's business and financial institutions. And he made serious efforts for the first time to include them also in his political plans for the future. He reached out, too, to the colleges and the universities for which Boston is famous, MIT, Harvard, Boston College, and others, for the kind of professional and technological assistance that he so badly needed in undertaking new and untried processes of urban renewal. For its part, Boston College created a series of what were called citizen seminars, initiated by Father W.C.V. Joyce, Dean of the Business School at that time, now the Carroll School of Management, and energetically directed by John Galvin. Held on the Chestnut Hill campus, where friends and foes alike, labor leaders and corporate presidents, longshoremen and lobbyists, journalists and politicians could all come and meet on neutral turf and take part in the heated discussions on some of the controversial issues of the day. Discussions that continued well into the evening and over the dinners that followed the official agendas. It was at the first of these seminars on October the 26th, 1954, that Mayor Hines gave the keynote address that had the somewhat quaint title, quote, "Boston, whither goest thou?" So a translation from the Latin, Quo Vadis. But nevertheless, it was a speech in which he laid out a really remarkable vision of Boston. A Back Bay Center, actually the site where the Prudential Center was later located. A government center, a World Trade Center, a convention center. Remarkable, but warning that none of these things would be possible unless the leaders of Boston got together and put aside their individual concerns and concentrated on the needs of the city. Hines appreciated the fact that Boston was not and is not just another American city. He believed that Boston was a city with a history and with a tradition that is both special and distinctive, and felt that those who worked in the city and made their money in the city should appreciate and should encourage and should promote that distinction. This was certainly true in the old days of Boston, speaking as a historian, when business and financial leaders were part of a community leadership that fostered culture and knowledge and academic excellence. In the early 1800s, when a young doctor named John Collins Warren looked around and realized that Boston had no hospital, he walked around and called upon the town's merchants and businessmen and bankers to put up the money. And they did. Not only did they establish the Massachusetts General Hospital, as well as what would become the McLean Hospital, but future generations of these same families continued to serve as trustees and board members. It was what Bostonians were expected to do. Thomas Hanson Perkins was a wealthy China merchant, gave up his own home in downtown Boston to help start what became the Perkins Institute for the Blind. A Harvard professor named George Tickner teamed up with Boston's great statesman of the day, Edward Everett, to start the Boston Public Library so that everybody could read a book. And John Lowell, member of the Lowell family that made its money in textiles, left his fortune to create the Lowell Institute. So Bostonians of every walk of life could hear the great speakers of the day free of charge. Although admittedly these were the actions of individuals, they were reflective of an ideal of community leadership among the city's businessmen that recognized things like the arts, culture, scientific discovery, and academic achievement. Those were the things that called Boston to be named the hub of the solar system. I mean, doesn't it feel comfortable to be sitting right in the center of the solar system? It was the Athens of America. It was the place that everybody wanted to come to and go to work. And it continued. In later years, when a banker named Henry Lee Higginson thought that Bostonians needed good music, he created the symphony orchestra. And when he thought it should have some place to play, he funded Symphony Hall. And it was the son of a successful dry goods merchant named Eben Jordan, who supplied Boston with its first opera house on Huntington Avenue, and later provided a large auditorium called Jordan Hall at the New England Conservatory of Music. Ralph Lowell, a successful investment banker who served on the boards of countless numbers of hospitals, libraries, museums, not only sponsored public radio and television in this area, but during the early days of urban renewal, joined the Association of Local Businessmen and Bankers, popularly known as the Vault. And certainly, there is no better example of this sense of community pride than the gentleman we honor here today, Richard Hill. Not only did he serve effectively as president of the Vault for many years, the Vault, his official title was what? The Boston Coordinating Committee, is what they preferred. But he also gave generously of his time and his talents to numerous civic and nonprofit organizations throughout the greater Boston area. But the Vault, as we all know, is no more. It's gone. And most of the old Bostonians are gone. And so are a great many of their Boston-based businesses, as we read about daily in the newspapers. But Boston, as the mayor suggested earlier, has plenty of new people in the city, and a whole new cluster of powerful financial engines that power our regional economy. We have some of the nation's most famous colleges and universities, a vast resource. Our research hospital and medical services, among the best in the world. Biotech companies, pharmaceutical industries have made this area preeminent in the biosciences. But have they yet developed any mechanisms for thoughtful and collective leadership in a historical city where their institutions are located, where they make their profits, and from which they draw their labor force? History, of course, never actually repeats itself. Still, there is something about the situation of Boston 50 years ago that seems to have some interesting similarities to the situation that the city finds itself in today. 50 years ago, the problems Boston faced tended to be physical, tangible, structural. 50 years ago, we faced problems of size, of space, transportation, budget management, building, construction. Today, the issues are much more subtle. They are more personal, they're more ideological in nature. New techniques for effective education in what is a high-tech environment. Humane responses to a more diverse workforce. In the light of current demographic changes, and creative mechanisms for developing a spirit of collective leadership that will acknowledge and consciously promote what is the distinctive historical and cultural traditions of the city of Boston. And so I guess what I'm suggesting, as our panel prepares to take place in a few minutes, I guess what I'm suggesting is that perhaps we might think today about what Mayor John Hines asked 50 years ago this year. Boston, with the go stop. Just where is Boston headed? How does it get there? And I think very, very important, who is prepared to set the agenda? Those are some historical thoughts on a historical day, and thank you very much.
Two must-haves that you've got to have every morning to make your morning complete: coffee and paper. Now this gentleman, at least for some of you, makes half of that necessity possible. He is the president and publisher of the Boston Herald, also president of JobFind.com, and he's also the chairman of the Boston College Citizens Seminar. Please help me welcome Patrick Purcell as he will do the honors for this afternoon's recognition.
Francis. As chairman of the Boston College Citizens Seminar, it is my honor to make a very special presentation to a very special person. Richard Hill became chairman and CEO of the Bank of Boston in 1971 and held that capacity until 1985. Not only did he run New England's largest bank, he became the city's go-to guy. If you wanted to get something done in this region, you went to Dick Hill. He served on numerous boards, including Liberty Mutual, John Hancock, United Fruit, Ryder, NYNEX, Boston Edison, the Museum of Fine Arts, the International Monetary Conference. He was also chairman of Dartmouth's Board of Trustees, co-founder of the Boston Partnership, and chairman of the powerful Boston Coordinating Committee, as Tom mentioned, the Vault. For Boston to become a world-class city, it needed a world-class business leader, and Dick Hill was that leader. Chad Gifford wanted to be here today, but as some of you may have read in the paper this morning, he's vacationing on a boat off the Keys. So he can't be with us here today, but he wanted to be remembered to Dick, and he sent along this note. I will really miss the opportunity to join others in celebrating Dick Hill. I joined the First National Bank of Boston in 1966, the same year Dick was elected president. For the next 2 decades, I was one of many who admired Dick and learned so much from what he did and the incredible grace with which he did it. For me, Dick was the model of a business leader who made all of his constituencies proud: shareholders, customers, employees, and the community. To say the very least, Dick inspired so many of us to make a great difference and to do so with absolute integrity. Thanks so much for honoring this special man. Dick, would you join me up here at the podium?
Thank you for those kind words, Pat. Father Lady, Mr. Mayor, other honored guests. I can't thank you enough for reaching back into history so far to remember me. Most of you, and especially the mayor, have already said some of the things that I'd like to say. But first I have to deliver a message to Pat from my wife, who is one of his ardent readers. And the message is, hang in there. It wasn't terribly difficult to be what you like to call a leader back many years ago. And the reason is simple. It's simply because businessmen did not understand politicians, and vice versa. We didn't realize what they had to do to get elected, and they didn't realize that we provided the jobs. Once those two groups got together and understood each other, the need for something like the vault pretty well dissolved. So what we need today is just what the mayor said. We need diversity of leadership. We have lots of different problems, lots of things to be worked on, and they have to be worked on by a lot of you here in this room and others representing some of the great hospitals and universities, mutual funds, venture capital funds, and everything else. So let me close this long-winded speech by telling you that I really wish I were back in the middle of things, especially at these new pay scales.
As we get our panel discussion underway here, I'd like to introduce you to the man who's going to keep things nice and orderly as it goes on. He's going to be our moderator. He is the president of Boston Foundation, one of the nation's largest and oldest community foundations. He has also worked under a couple of former mayors, Ray Flynn and also Tim White, and he has also co-authored the book, Comeback Cities. Please help me welcome Paul Brooks.
Thank you very much, Francis, Father Leahy, Mayor Menino, and other guests. Thank you for this tremendous turnout today. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. I can't resist a quick story of my own about Dick Hill. Francis mentioned that I worked for Kevin White, who was really my mentor in my youth, and I once had a conversation with him about asking what his relationship was like with the business community. And he said, first of all, you have to understand, I never had a relationship with the business community. I had a relationship with Dick Hill. So that sort of sums it up. The Boston Foundation is very pleased to be in this partnership with the BC Seminar and sharing this opportunity to celebrate 50 years, but more than the 50 years, the notable contributions of the Boston College Citizen Seminar to the Renaissance of Boston. And we're certainly invoking that tradition today. So we're very grateful to the college, to Father Leahy, to Peter Rollins, and everyone associated with the seminar. The Boston Foundation is celebrating its own anniversary this year. Believe it or not, we're 90 years old. And the foundation now has grown to the point where we have assets of $675 million. We're one of the largest grant makers in Boston and, for that matter, in New England. But one of the things that we think is most important for a community foundation whose mission is to contribute to the vitality and future health of our city and region is to stimulate the broadest possible conversation, public discourse about the issues and problems we face. That is the necessary predicate to whatever forms of civic action are going to take place. And we believe that the Indicators Project contributes mightily to a widely shared understanding of just what the situation is, what's going well, but what also we have to worry about. And though we cannot demonstrate it for you today, I urge all of you to make use of the Indicators website. It is an astonishing resource, great partnership between the foundation, the BRA, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and many other so-called data partners who have put together an unrivaled resource for learning about our community. And I want to thank in particular the person without whom this never would have happened, Charlotte Kahn. Where is Charlotte Kahn? She herself is a great civic treasure. Just to introduce our panel, I want to say a few words myself about the story that I believe the Indicators are now telling about Boston. As the mayor and others have said, the Indicators reinforce that this city and this region is in a uniquely favored position given trends in the world. With our astonishingly talented workforce, one of the highest trained in the world, our remarkable constellation of colleges, universities, teaching hospitals, technology companies, the renaissance of the center city itself, which could not have been taken for granted by any means when the Boston College Citizen Seminar began. The clean harbor, which will drive much of the future development of the city and the region going forward. We have much to be grateful for, but we also must recognize that these things did not just happen. They were the product of effort by great mayors, by great business leaders, great grassroots community leaders, working against what the wider society believed was absolutely overwhelming odds to rescue a city many had consigned to the dustbin of history. Viewed from that vantage point, the challenges we face today are far less daunting, really. Boston is not only not a dying city, it is one of the most vital and dynamic urban communities in the world. But it is just such a time that we should take the opportunity not to rest on our laurels, which I don't think anyone in this room is doing, but to try to get ahead of the problems and challenges we face. And there are not only challenges on the horizon, which the Indicators Project documents, there are problems that are already here, to which our response has been terribly delayed. And the mayor, I'm glad, talked at length about the housing crisis. Just what is it about us that failed to recognize that our housing price escalation was becoming a very serious problem for our economic competitiveness? And I think that's something that should concern us, that it took us so long. Last year we did pass landmark housing legislation which has the promise of moderating this problem, but it took far too long to do it. So it is not only the substance of the issues we face, but how and when we come together to tackle them that I think is the proper subject of this discussion. And to further this, I'd like to invite up right now our panelists who are going to help us explore these questions a little more fully. And I'm not going to give extended bios. Please come up, take your seats. We have Keith Motley, who is the interim chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, Boston, where he leads an institution of approximately 12,500 undergraduate and graduate students and a $176.5 million budget. Linda Whitlock, one of our great community leaders, the president and chief executive officer of the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, one of our leading youth-serving organizations. Paul A. LaCamera, the president of WCVB Channel 5, a 32-year veteran of the station. He has been with WCVB since the station first went on the air in March of 1972. And finally, last but not least at all, we welcome Ranch Kimball, Governor Romney's Secretary of Economic Development, who took that job just last April. He advises the governor on job creation, how to meet the needs of the private sector, and ways to strengthen the state's competitiveness. And before joining the government, Ranch had a long career in private consulting, principally with the Boston Consulting Group. I'd like to just open with a basic question about what your reaction to this report is, this mixed portrait of a city that is very, very strong, a region that enjoys great advantages, and yet one that is looking at some growing challenges. Paul, could you start us off?
Thank you. If you frame it within the larger question of leadership and where we stand today, and it was wonderful to see Mr. Hill, and there's another legend in the room, and John Larkin Thompson and Hubie Jones. People are very difficult to replace. But I agree with the mayor. There is an exciting new group emerging, but it's different. You know, as you said, I had the blessing of being at the station for over 30 years, and being a participant to a certain extent, and certainly an observer of this. And I think back of Paul O'Brien when he headed, when he was the president of New England Telephone, if you remember New England Telephone, 3 or 4 generations ago.
They were a Maybank's client.
But there was a feature article done on Paul O'Brien, and Paul spoke quite proudly in that article about the fact that he devoted 25% of his time to civic work. And I think that would be very difficult to replicate in today's economy, today's environment, regardless of how exciting and dynamic this new generation of young leadership may be. There's no dearth of leaders emerging or new leadership. It's the matter of channeling or funneling it to a common end, and I think, Paul, you speak about that. I'm going to cite one other example that I was struck recently. 5 or 6 weeks ago, the governor addressed a chamber breakfast, the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. And there's another organization that deserves a lot of attention and credit, as does Mass Inc., which is represented here today. The governor outlined on a PowerPoint presentation a plan for the economic revival of Massachusetts in response to some of the issues that have been raised today. And it was compelling. It was, and it was very thoughtful. Wound up on the front page, I think, of the Globe and the Herald, and close inside of the Herald at least. And 3 or 4 weeks later, the new Speaker of the House, Sal DeMaisi, came and spoke at that same breakfast group and outlined an economic plan for the Commonwealth as well. It was like they were in 2 different worlds. The plans had literally nothing to do with each other. And I don't say this critically of either official. In fact, I'm getting to know Sal DeMaisi a bit, admire him greatly. I have a particular fondness for all Italian political leaders. It's somewhat predictable with my last name. But I think it was so reflective of our culture, our history, and where we unfortunately are today. That you have these 2 critical state leaders dealing with one of the most important challenges we have, and that's job creation. And the fact that they were both out there with initiatives, thoughtful, comprehensive initiatives, but not in sync with each other. And I spoke from the audience, and I asked the speaker what he thought was compatible, how his plan might be compatible or not compatible with the governor's. And again, this is not a criticism, but he had not thought about it. And I think that is too reflective of where we find ourselves and where, unfortunately, we've been for a long time.
Linda, what's your reaction to that thought?
Well, I'm in complete agreement with Paul, at least on an assessment of what our challenge is. And I think the mayor talked about it, Dr. O'Connor did, you mentioned some of these challenges in your remarks, Paul. I think we need a new leadership paradigm. It was very striking, I thought, in listening to Dr. O'Connor today, cite so many individuals who, through their leadership, initiative, tenacity, because of the roles that they played in their companies, were able to advance certain beneficial agendas for the city. I think the new paradigm, the Linda Whitlock paradigm of leadership, if you will, would have two critical elements that differ from our traditional paradigm of leadership in the city. The first is to define leaders and leadership far more broadly. I think looking around this room, many of us probably know many of us who are in this room. That probably says something about us, but I think it says more about whom we view as leaders today. So I think leadership needs to be seen as a characteristic of individuals who are much younger than we are, who are much less well off than we are, who are more colorful, a little melanin, in the skin than the majority of individuals in this room. A great experience that I had of being in a very diverse group of leaders occurred when I had the good fortune of being a part of the search committee for our current terrific police commissioner, Kathy O'Toole. There were familiar names who were on that committee, but there were others who we didn't know, who didn't know us. For instance, Mary Suhu. I doubt that Mary's in this room, but Mary's a phenomenal leader in Boston. So I think we need, a broader construction of who's a leader and what constitutes leadership. Secondly, I think we need to find more creative approaches to engaging that broader group of leaders. We have a civic culture that I believe relies much too heavily on face-to-face meetings. Would that broader group of leaders be able to leave work for an hour and a half, in the middle of the day to attend this glorious community-building, intellectually stimulating, politically rich conversation? Probably not. But we've got to find opportunities for them to have the same benefits and advantages that all of us have today. And so I think and this also relates to reaching out to the new financial engines in town. Our organization has been most fortunate to have engaged some of the industries, the venture capital, the private equity, the financial services industries. We haven't yet engaged the biotech, but they're not profitable yet, and so the leaders aren't, are focused on their bottom line. But in that engagement, we realized that we needed to view time as the precious commodity that it is. Recent article in the Chronicle of Philanthropy that focused on the Gen Xers and how can charitable organizations engage those who are post-baby boom. And one of the major recommendations was that our organizations, and I would say the entire city and civic, structures need to realize that people value family, that people are trying to find a balanced life. And so when there are opportunities for engagement, those opportunities better be very time-specific, very focused, high value for the individual participants as well as for the larger opportunity that the leader is being engaged in. I'll stop there.
Keith Motley, one of the things that one was hearing in the context of the corporate mergers was that we have these remarkable colleges and universities, that people are understanding just how important they are as economic engines and as anchored institutions that will be with us, and perhaps looking to the leadership of those institutions to play a broader civic role. Is that realistic?
Very realistic. In fact, we were all proud to be listed as members of the mayor's new best friends. I think for the longest time in this city, university community, particularly university leaders, weren't seen in that light. In fact, I was at conversations recently where the notion of university leaders in the same room with business leaders sort of was frightening for some. For us, we believe that we're in the business of doing this kind of collaborative work. We create the I'm proud to serve at, has the capacity to put back into this economy, 86% of those that come there to be educated. So we contribute in so many ways, not just in terms of the development of those, but we also bring in these businesses and we help educate them through processes that we have throughout the campus. So we contribute in so many different ways.
But isn't individual leaders of these institutions playing a broader civic role a rather new idea? And is that something that, these leaders have been concerned with their own institutions for the most part?
In some cases, but there are some hidden jewels. When I look around the room and I look out at people that I looked at as role models a long time ago, like Father Monin and others, and saw how they were engaged, those were the role models. And I can look at a Dr. McKinnon and say, listen, those were the people who, when I was developing and wanted to be in a position to take their places, they were out and doing it. In fact, we're teaching you how to be an engaged campus community to a point where even though you could be out from the city, you could engage and bring out those people into conversations that made a difference. I watched panels talking about these things on campuses for the longest time. Our biggest thing was we weren't really getting that out to the public in a way that made sense. We sort of were so busy for so long taking care of our own internal thinking and processes, because in our education sometimes we like to sit around, think, and talk with each other. And we share it through books and other kinds of media, but oftentimes we don't pull together forums like this in a way that can make a difference. We have been doing that lately, and I think seeing this whole collaborative gene that we've been talking about has helped us sort of want to get out in front of that and be engaged in a different way. So,
Thank you. Branch Kimball, the leadership that we require, the civic mechanisms that we require, perhaps should have something to do with the nature of the problems we now have to solve. From your standpoint as the czar of the state's economy, what do you see as the most critical problems that we have to solve in that realm? Competitiveness is a word that people are talking about more and more.
Good question. I think first you've got to acknowledge the tremendous strength we've got. I've lived in a couple of other states for a few years here and there. It's one of the sort of side effects of being in consulting. We have wonderful cities in Massachusetts. I mean, not just Boston, with all due respect, but we have scores of cities that are like Boston in terms of their vitality. Most states are lucky to have two. We have dozens and dozens. We have a highly educated workforce. We have a lot of the things that you and the Boston Foundation cite as strong. I think one of our weaknesses is actually the fact that we still have a little bit of a Yankee hub mentality. We actually don't deal as much with the world outside Massachusetts as we should. And I'll give you a little example. I don't know how many people have followed the recent triumph that NASA and the European Space Agency jointly had, which is to actually land a probe on Titan, the moon of Saturn. If you don't go off to the Science Museum, which Rick Burns is with us as the chair of, they've got a wonderful planetary presentation. But what they did is they set a satellite that orbited Titan, the moon of Saturn, which is most like Earth, dropped a probe, the Huygens probe, that landed on it. And there's some film of the people in the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the European Space Agency anxiously watching the probe is falling through the sky. What's it like? The atmosphere's got some methane. The parachute is open. The retro rockets are fired. It's touched solid ground. It's sinking, but it's transmitting data. It's gone and destroyed. That's how out-of-state companies often feel when they send emissaries to Massachusetts. They're sort of, they're an out-of-state Fortune 500 firm. They're radioing in data on a cell phone or a BlackBerry for a few hours, then the culture here envelops them and kills them. And I know that's probably funnier than it should be. It was not a very good joke, but feel free to steal it. Rick did not write it. I just was citing him. I love the Science Museum, but the mayor talked quite eloquently about life sciences, which is absolutely an important sector. And he also mentioned the National Institutes of Health, which provides $19 billion a year in federal funding. And Massachusetts is #2 of all states, and #1 per capita. And getting it, Boston is #1 among all cities in the nation. But getting it, $19 billion, not bad. Corporate and venture R&D is $210 billion. It's growing at 5% a year. NIH funding is growing at 2% a year. Well, we have 11.25%. I'm an old business guy, so you're 2 decimal points, but we have 11.25% of NIH funding. We have only 2.5% of bio and pharmaceutical R&D spending all told, below the national average. We're 5%. We have slightly under 1% of the out-of-state corporate R&D that's not bio and pharma. And one of the challenges I think we face is to not have, sort of be the moon of Saturn where these out-of-state probes come to die.
Paul, I want to return to the issue of being in parallel universes and the divisions that still persist. But here again, invoking Thomas O'Connor, it compared to the divisions that racked Boston and had for 100 years prior in 1950, and the act of crossing that chasm performed by the mayor and then mostly at that time Brahmin business leaders, it doesn't seem like this ought to be as hard as it is. Why is it so hard, and what is it going to take to get, whether it's the speaker and the governor, acknowledging political competition in different political parties, et cetera, but what is it going to take to bridge these relatively smaller gaps that exist if you look 50 years back?
Well, I mean, if you go back to that example, I don't know whether it's rooted in different approaches, partisan politics, or just history and culture in Boston. If it's the latter, I mean, that really is unfortunate. But there are encouraging signs, and I think as there's greater diversity, and some people have spoken about that in the leadership that's emerging. Well, on the one hand, there are going to be people who don't come from the traditional backgrounds that many of us came from in the leadership of this city. So you think that there would be a natural scenario for conflict, but I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case. And, there's so many encouraging signs of that recently, and just within the last week and a half or 2 weeks, the election in Dorchester of a young Haitian American woman, 30-year-old Linda Rosina Forey, in the seat formerly held by the previous Speaker of the House. It ignited and excited that community. If you saw the press coverage, I think it ignited and excited the entire community. One of the best things about her, she's also a Boston College graduate. Talk about perfection. So, I mean, I think you can take heart, in those discrete cases in point where we're experiencing more and more of them. And I think that generation and those individuals aren't going to be burdened with the kind of play acting that has marked the past.
But does the civic community have a role in changing the choices for public officials that they might make on their own? And Ranch, you're going to be, I know, trying to get some pretty tough pieces of legislation through. What is the role of the private sector, of private leadership, of the civic community, potentially, in ultimately what become political debates and choices?
I actually think it's critical, and I'll give the historical example and translate it into the present. In 1960, New Orleans was actually a bigger city, bigger economy, faster growing than Houston. And as the change occurred in post-World War II Saudi Arabia and the Mideast, and Aramco was nationalized, we started to have a more global oil business. And someplace in the Gulf was going to become the headquarters of the oil business. Oil companies from the Midwest, from England, from Saudi Arabia, started sending executives to New Orleans. And those executives just couldn't fit into the local civic and political and business culture. They found that if they went 200 miles west to Houston, which had an equally good but underused port, Houston boomed. I think that one of the things that I think business people and politicians both recognize, in a successful community, I think you can fight over the big things. I think it's fair to fight over major policy issues, fundamental issues about where you physically might transform a city or what some of the policy issues are. But you should agree on the small things. And when I look at Massachusetts communities, and I obviously won't name any, but the ones that are going to do the best are the ones where, well, they may still have some fights on big policy issues. The local political, civic, and business leadership agrees on the small stuff and gets things done. And I think we'd like to move to that in Boston.
I'd like to ask a question of whoever would like to respond. We've heard about the vault, that mechanism. Dick Hill talked about the vault no longer being necessary in terms of the new diversity of the city and the varieties of sources of leadership. But that remains a persistent conversation around town. Do we need a new civic mechanism that obviously would look very different than anything we've had before? Or can we invent, issue to issue, special purpose coalitions like the one that formed around the housing issue last year? Just how are we going to cohere
civic effort so that it makes a difference and so we can really move the needle on issues that confront us, change the choices that politicians have, et cetera. Linda?
I'm a believer in the latter approach. That is, we need to gather together civic leaders and citizens. This is the Boston Citizen Seminar, and citizens and stewards of our great city to focus on specific interests. Time, finite engagement, and the challenge is ensuring the adequacy of public discourse and dialogue. Paul, you know that one of my favorite commentators on democracy is Amartya Sen. And in an article a couple of years ago in the New Republic, Amartya Sen underscored the fact that we typically see shared political participation and voting rights as the essential underpinnings of democracy. They are necessary, but they are not sufficient. The key ingredient is public discourse and reasoning. So what are the structures that are going to enable the multiplicity of conversations that already take place, that result in Boston and beyond, a fabulous new entity, public-private partnership that is going to promote and support out-of-school time programming and ensuring the quality of all programming. How are we going to have the observations, the learning, the knowledge, the challenges that emerge through that particular effort inform other dialogues that are going on in the city? The programming for the Greenway, tremendous opportunity for civic renewal and revitalization. What can we do together leaving this terrific luncheon and conversation? What are the structures into which, our energies and ideas and sense of possibilities can emerge? I only have questions, not answers.
Keith, thoughts on civic mechanism?
Yeah, I agree. I think that universities often claim that we're the incubator for those kind of discussions, but we also fear those as well. I know that we on May 5th at our university are going to have a visioning session that will allow the community to come in and talk with us about the kind of work that they would love to see happen just within the campus abutting areas, but throughout the city. Now, those conversations are hard because oftentimes the campus communities, it's hard to listen because we think we should be leading those discussions. We're supposed to be the experts on that, but these are the people who live that life every day, so we believe that allowing that conversation to grow and develop is something that's critical to this whole process. So I agree that we need to do that, but we need to also understand that oftentimes it's hard, even within the community that says that this is what we do and practice every day.
Thank you. I'd like now to take our remaining time and invite those of you in the audience with burning questions to ask them. Please identify yourself and address your question if you can to a specific person who's got a question. Yes.
Anyone can answer. It seems that 50 years ago we had a crisis to unite us. Is it going to take another one to do that?
For those of you who didn't hear, the question was, is it going to take a true crisis to unite us, or can we act in advance of a crisis?
Well, I think certain events, the fact, I don't want to make more of this unnecessary, but the fact that Massachusetts was the only state last year to lose actual population, and that's a derivative of corresponding job loss, and then the recent consolidations may not constitute a crisis, but certainly a moment to act. But just to follow up a little bit about leadership and where it's going to come from, I mean, I have a sense that John Larkin Thompson and Mr. Hill didn't go home a lot of nights, didn't spend a lot of nights with their families. And Linda mentioned this, just the different patterns today of business leadership, women and men, and the role of trying to do a better job of balancing family life. So I think the new paradigm that's going to emerge are going to be groups like the Boston Foundation, 50 years of the Boston Citizen Seminars, and Mass Inc. And And I think we're already seeing that kind of leadership rooted in real research, telling us what's going on and what we need to do. And the second is the role of the university. And I think there are models out there, and again, I'd cite Boston College. And Father Leahy's work on the crisis in the Catholic Church and the initiative called Church in the 21st Century. It's probably right now doing the most important work in the nation on the role and status and future of the Catholic Church. So there are those models, and I don't expect now you to take on solving Boston and Massachusetts as well, but I'm saying there are those models in the university resources as well.
I would just add my own commercial. I think the development, and this is a very recent development of independent think tanks like Mass Inc. and university think tanks like the Rappaport Institute and the McCormick Institute and the Center for Urban and Regional Policy at Northeastern are really astoundingly positive contributions to the quality of the conversation we're able to have. And there's still a lot of cities who dream about getting some of the intellectual firepower of their local colleges and universities focused on local issues, and we've got that. Another big plus for Boston. Other questions? Yes.
In the past, when the vault was active, you had a dominance of the business community dealing with economic problems, essentially. And I wonder if there's an issue for us looking now to government as the first place to look for economic problems. In fact, it's the business community, as Rance gave the numbers, that drives the economy. And does that speak to this void that how it's important to maybe fill this economic void where leadership should be coming from a different place than just government, which is constrained by a lot of things they do to the economy?
Well, it's a good question. I'm not sure I've got a sort of a global grand unifying theory, Steve, but I'll just give you one simple example, which is that, I didn't, as many of you know, wasn't born in Boston, but I moved here 25 years ago after getting out of college in the state, other than a few tours and duties. I've come to know Massachusetts when I took this role in public service. I realized the only way we were going to get economic policy was to go out. Me personally and my team talk a lot to businesses and talk a lot to the political leadership. And I'll give you one example, which is, many of you know, permitting. It turns out Massachusetts is the slowest state in the nation to get permitting for either new business construction or business expansion. Not by a little bit, by a factor of about 4. And this is an issue that has been widely discussed both within the business community and in the political community, and I think we're seeing some real synthesis even with Mark Maloney's leadership at the BRA. And he's worked with us in the state and literally hundreds of businesses to forge a consensus. So whether or not that's the vault model redone or it's what Linda was suggesting, which is the sort of issue-specific thing, it's a more sort of practical, operational working model for how to get it. But it takes, because my one disagreement with Linda is, I'm reasonably technically savvy, but there's no substitute for in-person meetings.
Well, I'm not saying completely eliminate.
But I know it's painful to, it's the trade-off of time and the lifestyle.
Yes.
Thank you. Others? Yes, Lucy.
At the same time as Massachusetts lost population, the city of Boston gained population. At the same time that the mayor announced the housing production goal, the governor did also, but the mayor of Boston also announced a percentage of that to be affordable. What I hear from Governor Romney doesn't suggest that production alone will solve the housing crisis in Massachusetts, and I don't see the kind of goals that we need in terms of affordability. I wonder, since some of the businesses are leaving the state because their workers can't afford to live here, I wonder if we can include in the state housing policy something about affordability, some resources for affordability, much more than we are right now.
Sure, I'll just give a brief comment. I don't want to go into great policy depth. I'm happy to do it offline, but the two pieces of major housing reform we do have at the state level, and by Commonwealth law, as Treasurer Cahill knows, I'm required to use at least one statute by number, so 40R and 40B, actually do have affordable housing goals, and when we use the state bonding capacity through some of our quasi-public authorities like the Mass Development Financing Authority, we do provide a minimum number of affordable housing units. So there are some slightly differences in the way we fine-tune it, but I think there's actually philosophically, in terms of both overall supply and going for affordable housing, substantial agreement between the state and the city of Boston. I'll just give one example, which is mindful. Miami, Greater Miami, in the 80s was one of the booming economies of America, so booming that its cop show, Miami Vice, did better on the TV ratings than did our cop show, Spencer for Hire, same time frame. from an ABC show, right?
We had Spencer.
I wasn't going to add that, but anyway, in Miami, their economy boomed, their population grew, housing prices barely grew faster than inflation. The reason why? The markets responded and built new units. They converted old buildings to housing. They converted and built up starter units, condos, apartments, duplexes. They built larger homes. We don't yet have a market responding to meet the needs of all of our workers and all of our young people coming out of college, all of our families, and all of our aging population. We've got to get working on that. I think you've done a lot of leadership.
Time for one more, perhaps. Yes.
Just have a obvious question. It's more sort of a gut check on what your opinions are. I know that it's easy to talk about the housing crisis and the policy crisis and the transportation crisis. And in many ways we've mobilized in the past sort of 2 years to deal with some of those things. But most of these are crises that we know sort of sell themselves, and that's why they become catalysts. And I wonder if you could sort of give your opinion on what you think the perceptive catalyst is going to be out of those three that sort of make up the love triangle that really pushes people to mobilize and get out of the denial phase. Which one of those three do you think sort of the next year will be able to push to the point that we get things like the Housing Task Force to kind of sort of morph into something that actually mobilizes now, works 10 times faster than we typically do for a city this size?
What's going to be the catalyst? Anybody want to look into the crystal ball? Well, let me say, I don't know if it's a catalyst, but I think it is a tremendous opportunity, and that is workforce. Obviously, we need our college graduates, and that's driving a lot of economic growth, and we have a very high percentage of college graduates. As Massing pointed out some years ago, we have an enormous share of our workforce in the workforce working hard, unable to advance, unable to be as productive as they would like to be because of skill and literacy deficiencies. And for employers, acute labor shortages are incentivizing many employers, certainly in the healthcare industry, but also in others, to work harder, to look for qualified people, to enter into partnerships, workforce partnerships. The mayor's been a tremendous leader on this, and to have truly employer-driven workforce partnerships is a tremendous opportunity to increase the productivity of the city and the region as a whole, and move all sorts of people to opportunity, to family-supporting wages with benefits. I think similar to the housing last year, we've got a commensurate opportunity, and the payoff would be huge. Again, if we can cohere, if we can get it organized and be powerful about it as opposed to diffuse and fragmented, which the workforce world has too often been. Linda.
One brief comment. When Dr. O'Connor was speaking, a woman very slowly walked along the building who looked homeless. She certainly looked